What if I told you you could buy a property with just £1? Well, that's exactly what I'm going to be doing in today's video. If you are a subscriber of the YouTube channel, if you're not, what are you doing? Hit subscribe. But if you are a subscriber, you may have seen this video a couple of weeks ago where I was talking about the single best strategy in the UK for 2024 property investing. Well, it's all down to something I'm going to be going through today. And if you stay till the end, I'm going to show you how I've taken on a multi-million-pound portfolio in 2024 so far, with little or none of my own money used. So first of all, this is called a lease option, which, by the way, is just a marketing term. Lease options don't really exist. It's an amalgamation of a few different contracts, which I will go through. But here's one I made earlier. As you can see, art is definitely something I am amazing at, and for everything else, I am just great. So you've got you on one side and the vendor on the other. You are the investor, the person buying the property, and the vendor is the person selling the property. So here's how it works. A lease option is you having the right, the vendor having the obligation. So what does this mean? It's a lease option in simple terms is when you as the investor agree the purchase price of the property today, but you pay for it later. Now you have the right but not the obligation to buy it later, which means that you can pull out of the deal, but the vendor is obligated to sell that property. And I'll give a couple of examples in a second. Legal consideration is as little as £1. And yes, I do legitimately send £1 over when I am sending the contracts, okay? So you would send over the pounds, the vendor receives the legal consideration, they send over the contracts, which gives you power of the property. So technically you don't own the property, but you have all of the rights of the property. And me being the artistic genius that I am, has also put the vendor saying, pay me later. And it is essentially, you get the benefit now, you pay for it later. Now I know you might be going, why would a vendor ever do that? Well, actually there's a lot of situations which I will go through. But before I go through any examples, let me tell you what the three contracts are. And we're now looking on this section here. So a lease option is mainly made up of three separate contracts. Sometimes there's a fourth, but I'll tell you about it. Number one is the management agreement or the lease agreement. What this gives you the right to do is rent out their property, but benefit directly from the income. An easy way to think about this is an adaptation of a management agreement that a lettings agent might have. So instead of you going, hey, I'm going to try and rent out your property and charge you a percentage of the rent, it's I'm going to pay your mortgage or an agreed amount each month. It doesn't have to be, by the way, it could be zero, but normally you'd at least pay for their mortgage. I'll pay for your mortgage on a monthly basis, and then I'm going to get the right to rent out that property, and I get 100% of the benefit of the rent. And that makes it legally binding with that management agreement. You'll also have an agreement in there on what works you're going to pay for. Now, I'll be open with you. I feel it's only right that when you're taking on a property, you take on the property. A lot of people, they get these lease options and go, anything over X amount is your problem. I really don't like doing that personally. But what I do say is any money I put in the property goes against a charge on the property, which we'll get to in a moment. The next is a purchase option. So this is actually giving you the right but not the obligation to buy the property in the future, okay? So you're not obligated to, but you do end up doing it if it goes well. And I'll give some scenarios on that. What the purchase option is also is something called assignable. And it's really important that you make sure it's assignable, because if you don't want to buy it in the future, you can assign that right to somebody else. So say, for example, I've got the right, but then you've got Dave over here who wants a bit of that. And Dave goes, do you know what? I'll give you £10,000 if you give me the right to buy that property you do. So you can get this and bypass you and go up to Dave, and now Dave can now buy it off of the vendor. And you get that permission up front in the purchase option. Finally, you need this, the POA, the power of attorney. And this is for two reasons. Essentially, it gives you certain rights to communicate on the vendor's behalf and make decisions on the vendor's behalf. And this is really important to be able to communicate with the bank, to pay the bank directly, to eventually buy the property down the line. And of course, if unfortunately the vendor passes away, you still have rights of actions and communication. So management agreement, purchase option, or the option agreement, and the power of attorney. Now, I did say I'd mention a fourth, but think of this as an optional one. But I personally would get a charge on the property. Now, a charge on the property is mainly important if there's equity in the deal. So if there's value in the deal and the value of the property is likely to go up if it's in a great area, then I'm going to get security on the property to make sure that I'm protected as the value goes through. So let me give you an example, because you might think, why would a vendor ever actually do a deal like this? Well, let's focus on example number one. This is a random example. So a common one is when they are upside down, that's my upside down house there, or underwater. And these terms mean they are in negative equity. Negative equity is when the value of the property is lower than the debt on the property. So a lot of people were in this situation in 2007, 2008, 2009, where they bought these properties at the absolute peak of the market. They were like, oh, you might even remember the days, 120% mortgages. It's like, what? Right? So these might be landlords where they're tired, they own a few properties, they're done with it, they want out. They could just give back the keys, right, to the bank, but then that would screw them up financially on their credit score. They can't really sell it because who in their right mind is going to go, I know your house is worth 100, but I'll pay you 110. So what you can do is a lease option. For example, let's say the value of this is 100,000. The debt is 110,000, but the mortgage term has 13 years left on the mortgage. I know that I can rent this property out for around 700 to a good tenant, and the mortgage on this property is £300. All right, £300. So I'm going to say, hey, look, I can buy this off you today, but how about I pay you 110,000 for the property? They're going to go, why would you do that? It's only worth 100. I know that, but you know you're going to walk away with nothing. Right? So it's not actually selling the property that you really care about today, is it? You just want to walk away and forget about the property. Is that the gist of it? For most of them, yes, that is the gist of it. They get to walk away from the property, and I usually communicate this. What if I buy your property at 110k? We agree that we get it contracted right now, but I'm going to buy it in the next few years or at some point in the future once the market's had time to increase. But in the meantime, I'll babysit your mortgage, I'll pay for everything, and then you get to walk away. This is probably the most common type of situation that you're in to do a lease option. They say yes. So I'll put the option on the property at 110. I'll give them the £1 that they need to make this legal consideration. I'll give them myself the right but not the obligation to buy it in the next X amount of time. So I might agree 13 years to give myself the max. And by the way, I can buy it at any point in that 13 years. If I think it makes sense in a year, then I'll do it. If it's in 5 years, then I'll do it. I'll then rent it out at 700, got the mortgage at 300, and I'll make the gross profit in between. Obviously, there's some maintenance management, etc. But hopefully that makes sense. Give me a yes in the comments if I am explaining this well, or not at all. Now, let me give you some scenarios here. I've made some cash flow along the way. Let's say it's 10 years that I agreed to make this easy. Now, in 10 years' time, let's say the value of the property has gone down. Well, what am I going to do there? Well, more likely I'm going to say, look, I'm really sorry, but I'm not going to complete on this property. Or we'll talk to the bank, explain the situation, and by the way, most of the time the bank will extend the loan, and we've done that quite a lot of times. If you didn't know you could do that, you could get the bank to extend it. Usually they'll extend it between 3 and 5 years, nothing crazy, but again, until the value goes up, you can keep doing that. Let's say the value of the property realistically in 10 years is about 200,000. If it's in a good area, it will be around double the value. Now imagine you go, do you know what? I'm going to buy it. Now this is where it gets really key, because if the vendor goes, no, I'm not letting you buy that at 100 grand. Well, actually it's my right to do it, and you are obligated to do it. Okay. And there's some certain things to make sure you get what's yours in that situation. Alternatively, let's say you didn't want to buy it yourself. Instead, what you can do is, let's say we go back to our mate Dave, and Dave wants to buy it at 200,000. Then Dave buys the property at 200,000. The vendor gets their 100,000, and I get my 100,000 pound profit on top of the rental profit that I've been getting along. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, the second example is where the value is actually quite a lot higher and the debt is lower, so they've got built-in equity. Now you might go, why wouldn't they just list it to sell? Well, they could do that, but often this is down to the person's situation rather than the situation with the property. Example number one was a property problem. This is a situational problem. So this is all about how fast that they need the money. And in general, here's how I do it. So I've done a £200,000 property. I've then purchased that at 87.5% of the value, which in this case is 175,000. But what I'm doing is I get a 10-year lease option on that property. So I agree 175 today, but I'm going to pay for it in 10 years time. So it's 87, so I'm already getting 25k built in. And then often the reason they're doing this is because they need some quick release money. So it might be that I pay them, say, £10,000 today, which is a much higher consideration fee, but that comes off of the 175. So that 175 at the end is actually 165. So yes, this is more expensive for me getting in, but I've just got access to a £200,000 portfolio, built in free money of 25,000, which is this gap here, and I can pay for it at any point in the next 10 years. Now, this is increased risk for me because I have paid that £10,000, which is non-refundable. So if I don't end up buying this or selling it on in the next 10 years, I lose that £10,000. But for me, number one, I don't really care. I've got the cash flow anyway. But number two, I only do this in great capital growth situations. If you've been watching my videos for a while and hopefully got value, put education in the comments and we will get in touch. We'll send you a link. You can book in a one-to-one free consultation call. There is no big pitch on this. We want to find out where you're at, where you want to get to, and how we can help you on your journey. So if you want to have a chat with us, put education in the comments below. So before we go through what deals that I've got so far in 2024, I want to give you some top tips. Here's one I made earlier. So top tip number one, treat this as if you were buying it. So many people get lease options and they don't do all of their due diligence. I'm still analyzing the area. If it's got a tenant in there, I'm going to analyze the tenant. I want to make sure all the compliance is in place. Has it got EICRs? Has it got CP12s, which is your electric certificates and your gas safety certificates? Do everything I can. Number two, get charges on the property. A charge on the property is like when you get a mortgage, your bank puts a first charge on your property, which means that if you screw up, they can force you to sell the property and they've got security in it. And it's the same here. A lease option is legally binding, but I don't want to take the chance of that person in 10 years' time going, no, I can't do that. I'm not willing to. Well, it doesn't matter. I've got full charges on your property. You can force it if needed, but you can take full control and you've got security. Number three, get restrictions on the property. So restriction type that you may have heard of is something called an RX1, which is your most basic restriction. I prefer unilateral notices. It's called a UN1, Uniform November 1. UN1 is a unilateral notice, and what this does is it puts a restriction on the property, but they have to get your permission to remove it if they try to sell it elsewhere, which they can't legally do, but nice for that extra little thing. Number 4, financing. How are you going to finance this at the end? You need to do this in the right way, and this video isn't for it. It's a bit more advanced. You need to do it in the right way. Otherwise, you won't be able to get a mortgage on it in the end. So you need to do it in a very specific way to make sure you can get mortgages. And again, if you're ready to really back yourself and invest in yourself, put education in the comments and we'll be in touch. But you need to make sure before you enter into any formal agreement, I think it's just the right thing to have an idea of the method that you're going to buy at the end. I think if you're going into this with no intention of buying it, you're deliberately being deceitful to this poor vendor up front. Just don't be a dick. Fairly obvious. Next is tenancy legals. Again, I really mentioned act like you're buying it today, but tenancy legals and compliance, where people really screw up is there's not many educators out there that educate you on how to be a compliant landlord. Obviously, you've got the National Association of Residential Landlords. They are amazing. But please make sure you've got your CP12s. Please make sure that you've got your EICRs. Please make, and I know this is a bit more advanced than a normal video, please make sure you've got everything in place to be a compliant landlord. Because whilst the owner is ultimately responsible, you have a responsibility by taking control of this property. Again, basically, don't be a dick. Finally, check if there's any chance of bankruptcy. If the vendor has a chance of going bankrupt today, you have a fiduciary responsibility to just make sure you're doing everything to support them, not take advantage of the situation. So you have the right but not the obligation to buy. You make sure it's assignable, and really this is an amazing way to get involved in property, and I believe that this is going to be the strategy in 2024 that is an absolute game changer. So as I said, if you're not subscribed to this channel and you want to learn more about property investing, I've hundreds of videos on here and I'm posting every single week. Make sure to hit the subscribe and the notification bell, and hey, if you did get value, make sure to destroy that like button. If you want to get educated by me and my team, put education in the comments. We'd love to have a chat.